So with with all the places that you've lived over the years, what was your favorite place to live?
I don't really think I can say I have a favorite place. I have distinct memories of each place that I've lived. Everything has a different meaning in my life, but I wouldn't really say that anywhere is my favorite place. There are some places don't think I would ever want to move back to. Well, to be fair, most of them I wouldn't want to move back to. But that's just the product of your life changing and having different priorities.
So another major life event was 9/11. Obviously, you had mentioned before that the Challenger wasn't as exacerbated as things nowadays are. What was different between the Challenger and 9/11?
I mean, obviously, I was older for 9/11, so I remember more, but I don't remember the Challenger being the only topic of conversation in an endless sort of way. And even years after, or in the several years, maybe up to 10 years following 9/11, every year on that anniversary, it was rehashed and replayed and relived um, every year for a lot of years. And when it happened, um, of course, that was the only thing that was on TV for days upon days upon days as they were still sifting through the rubble and, trying to clean things up. And, they sensationalized all the kids that were born um, at that time to anybody that was a New York City firefighter or anybody that lost their life from the fire department. Um, they've the media has pretty much followed those kids for all of these years.
So, do you remember where you were on 9/11?
I do. I was in Tahlequah, Oklahoma.
Were you in college at the time?
I was in college, but I was not in class at the time. I was at home. It happened before I went to school for the day, I think.
How did that affect your life living in such a small town, thousands of miles away from New York?
Other than the fact that that was all people talked about, it really didn't. And then the surge of um, ridiculously high um, gas rates and just some of the things that happened because of that affected me. And in the years right after that, and of course every year since then, it's affected every form of travel that you can possibly imagine.
So, you had mentioned that you were in the Air Guard 23 years and retired 2 years ago. So, you were in the Air Guard at the time that took place.
Yes.
Was your troop ever, was your base ever really prepared to go and help with that?
Um, yeah, our not directly, not right then. We didn't get called, but um, in the years after that, as soon as we decided as a country to go to war, that's more so when it affected my base and every other base in the country.
So, do you think 9/11 is, I mean, obviously it's still a tragedy. Do you think we've overblown it a little bit?
That's a It's hard for me to say because it didn't impact me like it did those families, and maybe for them, you know, that's a way of honoring their loved one in such a tragic event. But um, I I am fine knowing that it happened, but not having to relive it as much anymore.
So, an when did you move to Murfreesboro?
In 2006, after I graduated from hygiene school.
So, me being a weather nerd, um, what was your memory living in Murfreesboro of the tornado that went there in 2009?
Um, I don't know. It's really weird because at first we didn't even know anything was happening. We just all the power went out. We didn't have a weather radio on. We had no idea that the storm was as bad as it was until somebody who had been at our house prior called us and said, "Hey, you know, you need to take cover. There's a tornado coming your way." And then we got the weather radio out and could kind of track it. But honestly, we were not prepared. We didn't really have a great safe place to go, and um, you were little, and um, yeah, it hit the front part of our neighborhood and picked up and or cut a weird corner, and then it picked up and went and dropped down somewhere else. So we were incredibly um, fortunate that we didn't take a direct hit at our house.
How how did that affect, you know, 9/11? You didn't have a family to speak of. How does that change when you know you're impacted like that with a kid?
I mean, obviously, um, my first responsibility was making sure that you were as safe as I could have made you. But even then, I had no idea what the safest thing to do for you would have been. I mean, we've never been in a tornado before, even though I've lived in Tornado Alley the majority of my life. I was never, that's the closest that I've ever been to a tornado.
So, speaking of tornadoes, you had mentioned that you had lived in Joplin. Now, what was what did you find? Did How did the 2011 Joplin tornado affect you?
Um, well, it was 5 years to the day that we graduated from hygiene school, and it was so massive and so destructive that it made me sad to look at pictures of the place where I had lived and structures that I was familiar with. And one of the places that I lived, my particular apartment building, I'm pretty sure was completely gone from one of the pictures that I saw. And it was just, it was devastating. I was thankful that the friends that I graduated with, that still lived there, nobody got hurt that I knew, but it was it was sad to see the path of devastation.
Which storm do you think affected you more at that time?
I mean, I guess the Joplin tornado, um, when the tornado went through Murfreesboro in 2009, we had lived there for a few years, but and even though it hit our neighborhood, it didn't really directly impact anything that I had any sort of affinity for. It
Yeah,
didn't hit our house, it didn't hurt us. Um, but Joplin was different because that was so much more devastating to so many more core memories, I guess.
yeah. So, um, you were you were in the military for the war you had mentioned. Did that really have a good impact on you? Not necessarily a good impact, but what was the impact like for you?
I mean, honestly, for my particular role in the Air National Guard, I was not deployable. I'm dental, so we are considered manpower. So it didn't really affect me. I ended up volunteering. They were looking for anybody from any career field to volunteer to be security forces augmentees to help guard our base while our security forces guys got and girls got deployed. Um, over to various places in the Middle East to actually participate in the war. So I did that for about 4 months and essentially learned a little bit about guarding our base and uh, carried a weapon all the time. But the threat never seemed real, even though we had resources that potentially could have been, I guess, admired. We had F-16s, fighter planes, um, but I don't know. I think our planes went, but we still had to guard the base. We still had resources, so yeah.
Did you learn how to handle weapons during basic training, or was that something you kind of picked up doing security?
Well, kind of neither. We did learn to shoot the M16 in basic training, and we did have to qualify on it. Um, and at the time in the military, we had to qualify every so often on the M16, but I can't really say that I ever learned to handle it per se. I learned how I was supposed to carry it and the different um, rules for what you do with it when you enter a building and those kinds of things. But that was about it.
So you in all those years working, how did COVID affect life in the military different than everything else?
Um, well, in a lot of ways, it wasn't any different. I mean, we tried to put as much space between us and somebody else as we could. We wore masks. I think we did alternating um, shifts at drill, so there wasn't the all the people in the building all at the same time. When everything shut down, my civilian job, just like everybody else's, closed for an unforeseen, unknown period of time. So I went on active duty orders, and I was essentially deployed to our home station, where I did administrative work for the people who went out in the field who were administering COVID tests at different health departments throughout the state.
So what was different between regular drill, um, like weekend drills versus active duty? What was different?
Well, of course, my job was different. Um, I had to learn new lingo and new acronyms, and um, we were joined together with the Army. It was a joint task force, but the Army was essentially leading it. Um, so I had to sort of learn how that interaction was supposed to go. And my daily job responsibilities were keeping track of all of our people that were at these various locations and data points for how many tests they had given that day, and I don't know, whatever else we were tracking. In the military, you track everything. And yeah, every time they moved from one spot to another, I had to keep account of that because that affected their pay. Even though I wasn't doing their pay, I had to keep track of it for their pay.
So obviously COVID didn't just go through 2020. It's got kind of still an issue now, but not as definitely not as big as 2020. Did that affect why you stayed in the military?
Definitely affected why I got out of the military early. I was still supposed to be in until August of this year, but I refused to be compliant, um, and opted to get out instead of getting the COVID vaccine.
Why were they trying to make you get the COVID vaccine?
I have no idea. At the time, They said it was the right thing to do, it was the safe thing to do, but I disagreed, and I had already had COVID, and I just believed that having already had it, I had a natural immunity that a vaccine could not give me, and the vaccine wasn't going to prevent me from getting it again. It was allegedly going to possibly reduce the severity when I did get it again, so I just didn't see the need for it.
So, speaking of vaccines, did you have to get a specific set of vaccines when you got into the military? How did that work?
Yeah, we got a ton of vaccines when I got in. I don't even know what they all were. I was I was lucky because of my career field. I never had to have smallpox and I never had to have anthrax. But um, I don't even know what all vaccines I got. And in the course of 23 years, I had 25 flu shots and countless tuberculosis um, tests. Yeah.
So, having been retired for the military now, do you regret that?
What, retiring?
Yeah.
Nope. Not even a little bit.
What's different working, a normal job with the added almost job of military versus just having a normal job?
Um, I gave up a lot of time with my family, obviously. Guard drills were only 2 days, but um, when we lived hours away, I would come up on a Friday night, so I would miss Friday night at home, and then by the time I got home on Sunday, I was exhausted and had to go to work on Monday. It made for 2 really long weeks, a lot of travel, a lot of tears, a lot of difficult um, times leaving with kids crying at my feet, not wanting me to go. It was a lot of long hours while I was at work. Our job was one of the only jobs that didn't have a full-time person working it, so I would get there a lot of times at 5:30 in the morning, just to try to get caught up for what the day was going to bring. And we were shorthanded most of the time, and there was more work to do than people to do it. So it was a lot of stress. It was a lot of accountability throughout the month for different things, um, based off of our weekend responsibilities. And I don't miss it at all.
So, would you say it makes your normal job almost easier?
I mean, it does in the sense that I don't have that stress. My weekends are my weekends. I don't have to think about, oh, is it drill weekend? I can just do whatever I want on a weekend. I don't have to plan a year in advance around a drill calendar.
So, now you have, what, 3 kids?
3 kids.
How does that change? Obviously, it was hard going to drill with one kid. What changed with more kids?
There was a more of a sense of guilt, because now I'm leaving more more kids behind, more responsibility. Sometimes, that required your grandparents to watch you at some point, usually on Friday. Um, it added an extra level of stress to your dad to now be fully responsible, 100% for 3 people, where normally that would be a shared responsibility. I still worried about everything while I was gone, you know. Um, so it was a lot of stress. It was a lot of heartache, and it was a lot of guilt.
Well, we're running out of time, so thank you for doing this interview.
You are welcome.